Anya Parampil, a powerful journalist, political commentator, and author of Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire. Anya, welcome. Well, look, tell us put us out of our misery. What did your husband say at the Rage Against the War?
It's always good to be with you, George. I hope that we can one day see you in person in the UK, even though I fear about traveling there these days. Max gave a brilliant speech yesterday, and it was just encouraging to see so many voices in the United States rallying, not only here in Washington, D.C., but in New York as well. There was a Peace and Freedom rally put on by Gerald Celente, featuring voices such as Andrew Napolitano, the judge and former Fox News host who now is a very popular podcaster, and people coming across different political stripes, or at least what we thought were our political stripes or divides in the past. For example, Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute standing alongside me and Max yesterday in DC, and saying that it's really time that we put aside any of these differences that we thought we had, or perceived differences that sometimes feel as if they're projected on us from the top down, in order to call out our common enemy, which is this government in the United States that has completely abandoned any pretext of representing the American people and thrown its entire weight behind the Zionist entity in the Middle East, even if it means nuclear war, dead U.S. troops, and all-out war with Iran. This is the same group that is testing war with Russia, moving Russia to reevaluate its nuclear protocol, because under Biden's leadership, the U.S. has allowed Ukraine to wage war on Russia, now even within Russia's own borders. So it's a very scary time to be an American, because it feels as if we don't have any choice here. As much as in the past Donald Trump called out the deep state, it seems that he's now embedded with Zionism more than ever, completely owned by his top donor, Miriam Adelson, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who just went on X last night and called for the U.S. to support an invasion of Lebanon as just a blatant Zionist, someone who attempted to negotiate these failed peace accords in the Middle East that were really nothing more than a real estate deal for his family. So it's now a time more than ever for Americans to speak out. And what Max really drove home is that the Palestinians are a canary in the coal mine. This group of people that are running our government and running the governments in Europe as well are testing their technology, whether it's surveillance or weapons, on the Palestinian people, because it'll ultimately be, these weapons and these tools will be turned against anyone who resists, whether that's you or me in Britain or the United States or people beyond. And it is imperative that Americans stand up to this. And Max said, especially as an American Jew, he cannot forgive Israel for what they have done, for changing the way that we even look at our own child, because every day we are forced to look at the video of children that look just like her being pulled out of the rubble of Gaza, and now Lebanon as well. And it feels like there's no breaks. And so this is the time to speak as loudly as we can. And that's why I'm so grateful for your program and for other people who are not pulling any punches right now.
Thank you. The sojourn on X by Kushner was quite extraordinary, both in its length and in the scope of what it said. You're right. The son-in-law of the next president of the United States, one presumes, we'll come back to that, who'll be living more or less in the White House, except when he's not on personal missions to Saudi Arabia and so on. In this X post, Kushner openly calls for Israel to conquer Lebanon. In the week that the Jerusalem Post, extraordinarily, they've now removed it after 3 days, extraordinarily claimed, the Jerusalem Post claimed that God promised Lebanon to the Jewish people. that Lebanon is part of the promised land and that Israel must conquer it. This is quite astounding stuff from a guy who's going to have a lot of influence in a second-term Trump presidency, isn't it?
It's terrifying because we already saw what danger Jared Kushner can bring. This is a man who not only is on the front end of terror, whether it's for advocating these kinds of wars or putting up the ridiculous normalization agreement between the so-called Arab states and Israel, but he then comes in on the back end and makes money through his real estate ventures developing the countries that are destroyed. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a piece of Ukraine. But he said himself also that it's time to develop Gaza's beachfront property, as if he has the right to do that. This is a man who also was bragging about recently on X that he designed the new and revived Serbian capital because of the destruction that NATO wrought on the country in the 1990s. So he's cashing in on death. That's Jared Kushner. And other than that, his family are just a bunch of slumlords in the United States, criminals. And these are the people that really propelled Trump. I don't think Trump would have become as powerful or influential if he is if it weren't for these figures around him, particularly the Kushners and the Adelson money network. Trump himself was bailed out by these forces, and now that he's bankrupted or being threatened to be bankrupted, he's going to have to lean on them even more heavily. And so it can't be overstated, the danger of Jared Kushner. And I think Trump should also question who was leaking on him throughout his entire time in the White House. There were many incidents that when it came to his peace initiatives, for example, reaching out to the Russians before he came into office in order to tamp down tension between Washington and Moscow, that information was leaked, and one of the only figures that was privy to it was Jared Kushner. And so he's not really someone that I think even cares about the president. He just cares about his own self-interest and that of his family. And this is also, it's just so shocking to be an American today and see the mask lifted.
Well, it's not much easier being British, let me tell you. The electoral impact of all of this seems to me, I put this to Rachel Blevins earlier, but I'd like your view on it. I know Michigan, state of Michigan, quite well. I don't know other states around about like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and so on. But it does seem to me that Kamala Harris, glorying in the blood of the Lebanese people, kills her candidature in the state of Michigan. Unless I need to get out more in the state. There are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese, never mind Arabs, Muslims, Lebanese. Even the cops are Lebanese in Dearborn. Even the cops have got pictures of Hassan Nasrallah in their cop cars in Dearborn, Michigan. And Kamala Harris, glorying in what's happened in Lebanon, surely she cannot win that state.
Very well. And yeah, the community there runs deep. I know my mother, for example, she teaches English as a second language, and in the 2000s, she was teaching Iraqi nuns that had fled the U.S. invasion of Iraq, their own country, and talked about how before 2003, they were safe, and their neighbors maybe were of a different faith, but everybody was able to get along, but that our presence there and our support for extremists in the region is what placed them in danger. And I agree with you that Kamala's strategy in Michigan is in jeopardy. I saw the mayor of Hamtramck, Michigan, who's an Arab but a Democrat, recently endorsed Donald Trump. And actually his younger daughter, Tiffany, is married into an influential Arab family. And as a result, it seems that some influential even leaders of mosques and other people in the community have endorsed Trump. Now, that might not actually translate into votes for Trump, because I think many Arabs also know that Trump will maybe know better. And it seems that both parties are captured by Zionists. And the one voice for peace that we have consistently or had is Jill Stein running in the Green Party. But I was very dismayed recently to see a statement that she made after she was baited by Mehdi Hassan into denouncing Putin and Assad and equating them to Netanyahu. Even though she attempted to stand her ground in that interview, her campaign then turned around and released a statement denouncing Assad and placing, every world leader that's bad, in her view, in the category of Netanyahu. And I think that greatly undermined her campaign, because unfortunately, some of these influential Muslim groups here that, for example, were very pro-Syria war, regime change when it served their sectarian interests, have a lot of influence, and they pulled her aside basically and said, if you don't take our line on this, then we're not going to support you. And that doesn't necessarily represent the Arab community as a whole. Not all Arabs fall into the category of CAIR and these other groups. And as you say, a lot of them actually are Lebanese Christian in Michigan, and they know that Hassan Nasrallah was responsible for preserving Christianity and these communities in Syria, where I visited, for example, Malula, the ancient Syrian Christian city where they still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ, to this day. And Max and I spoke with nuns who had been held hostage by al-Qaeda terrorists. We stood in the hotel that al-Qaeda terrorists had taken over and used as their base of operations. And it was Hezbollah and the Syrian army, with assistance from Hezbollah and Russia, that prevented that town from essentially being wiped off the map. And people here know that. The influential groups may not want people like Jill Stein to understand that, but the average citizen does. And it just, again, goes to show that these influential groups have captured all of our parties, even the progressive parties, and it's very dismaying time to be an American.
Well, I've been in the Vatican many times, but Malula is the holiest place I have ever been. It's by far and away the most spiritual place that I have ever been. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda would have had their black flag flying over it, and every nun and every priest would be in the ground if it were not for the Syrian Arab army, Hezbollah, and their Russian ally. Which brings me to my last point, Anya, because it's a very busy show tonight. If the ground invasion goes on, if Iran finally speaks, will the United States engage in all-out war on behalf of Netanyahu just a few weeks before a presidential election?
I don't think the U.S. public would have the appetite for it, but unfortunately, I think the way that the Biden administration has been playing these wars is that they're using the Ukrainians in Ukraine to have their war with Russia because they know they can't afford any U.S. body bags, and they're allowing Israel to continue to push the limit of its boundaries. Now, I mean, years ago, I think Americans would have laughed at the idea that Greater Israel was a serious plan, but I don't think there's any denying it now that the Israelis are very serious about establishing, taking away as much of the surrounding land and establishing their idea of a biblical land. I mean, they're doing it in front of our eyes and they're saying it, like you say, and then deleting it. They can't hide anymore. But if we get American body bags back, and unfortunately it might have to come to that, then I think there will be a real crisis in the United States. We were already facing a crisis because of our engagement in Iraq. This will be another level of terror and war in the region, and also something that I think American troops and American soldiers will feel in a way that I don't want it to come to that. But if Americans are just going to sit on their hands and fall for this regime change propaganda once again, I don't see it playing out in any other way. But the tragedy is, again, that if it results in a backlash against terrorists and an election of Trump, I'm not confident that we'll get any other policy. This is This is a government that has been hijacked, and there's no way to press the brakes.
Anya
I hope
Parampil,
that the
as
US will not
always,
do it.
wonderful to talk to you. Journalist, political commentator, and author of a very fine book, Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of US Empire. Thank you, Anya.